Earlier this year, I got to sit down with Matt Eich to talk about his work and his most recent photo book, We the Free. Matt Eich has been one of my favorite photographers for years now, and I've shared his work through zines and books here on the channel in the past, but this is the first chance I actually got to just sit down and talk to Matt, and I'm excited to share the conversation with you all today. So big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video and supporting this channel. Let's get into this conversation with Matt Eich.
Yeah, so the photo origin story always kind of roots in my grandparents, and specifically my grandmother had Alzheimer's disease, and it was kind of a formative thing for me as a kid, watching her memory be erased and kind of seeing her identity slip with that. And it was around that time my grandfather handed me a point and shoot camera, and we went on a road trip together. And I still remember the feeling of magic when those photographs came back from the lab. Yeah, it kind of got bit by the bug. I was also a real socially awkward introvert living out in the sticks in rural Virginia, and didn't have a lot of reasons to interact with other humans. So I photographed a lot of nature and mostly used slide film. And my dream job at the time was the Ritz camera store at the local mall. And so when I was in high school, I managed to land that gig, and it was during lunch breaks that I would go down to the bookstore and peruse American Photo. And I think PDN was too highbrow for me at that time, but there was like popular photography or whatever, like kind of got in it from a maybe a bit of a gearhead perspective, but very quickly phased out of that. And I think it was American Photo had a spread of James Nachtwey's work from Afghanistan right around the time that he'd been wounded. I know it was Iraq, and he'd been wounded in a hand grenade attack. And remember how they framed photojournalism in that story sounding pretty important and compelling, at least for my like 16, 17-year-old brain.
Were your parents supportive in did they kind of see that this was something that you just latched onto at an early age? Did they kind of see like, oh, this is he's found his thing, or what was the family, I guess, support like as a young photographer finding something like that, especially in a more rural area where maybe it's not quite as common, or uh, not the popular career path, I guess.
They encouraged as they knew how, right? So like my dad encouraged me to write a how-to article for Birds and Blooms magazine, which was like probably the first time I got published. And I think they encouraged me to, enter the county fair and the state fair, and so I would do stuff like that and bring home ribbons.
Right. Right. Yeah. Have
As
something to
one
show for
does.
it.
Right, right. Yeah, and that, you know, might give you a sense that you know what you're doing, which none of us really do. Those little bits of support and encouragement were helpful. They also, I think, just knew that I was wired a little differently. And so there was around the age that most people should have gotten the talk. I got the, oh, so you want to be an artist talk. And it went something like, oh, so you want to be an artist. Like we can tell you're not going this traditional path, and you should know that like if you walk this path, like probably going to be the last to be hired, the first to be fired, like in times of economic turmoil, you're gonna, hurt the most, higher rates of divorce, alcoholism, depression, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, look, y'all put your research into this. That's great.
Yeah.
But yes, sign me up.
The reason I ask about your parents, your work has always involved family, and I've always really enjoyed that as someone who always just has kind of navigated life with the camera. What has that been like for you in terms of bringing the camera into personal everyday life and also sharing that? Just as someone who experiences the same thing and thinks about it a lot, I've always been curious about just how your approach is, or really the importance, I think, of including your sort of real life and your family, including that in the work. What's that been like for you?
It's yeah, funny. And this should maybe be a whole separate conversation that we
Right.
do on a different occasion, just about
It's
photographing family
it's
and
yeah.
the camera in one's personal life. But, while I mentioned I was mostly photographing nature, flowers, birds, frogs, etc., I was also kind of, as a kid, in the background photographing my siblings primarily, but my family a little bit as well, and the rural surroundings that we were growing up in. And so it was subconscious, and I was certainly looking at family albums and not really thinking about that. And I was probably exposed to stuff like Sally Mann and Emmett Gowan and artists like that when I was fairly young, because they were Virginian artists and,
Right.
being shown or published, and written about. And most of my photography exposure growing up was through the local newspaper. And my parents had a newspaper basket that stuff would land in after it was looked at, and I would just sift through and like latch on to certain photographers' bylines. And the Virginian Pilot was an amazing newspaper. And so I was fortunate to have a pretty rich photo education growing up just through the newspaper basket,
Yeah.
before I ever made it to the bookstore. And then in the bookstore, uh, we didn't have access to like cool art bookstores, but Barnes and Noble had like a Sam Abel book, and that was kind of my entry point to photo books, which is also a kind of love language that I have at this point. My relationship to photography and like family has always been intertwined because of its relationship to memory and this backstory with my grandmother. But when I was falling in love with my wife, I was also starting to make the pictures in Carry Me, Ohio, so that's sort of infused in the background of that. And in the world of photojournalism, um, one is supposed to disappear, right, and not be part of the work. And at a certain point, I realized that that wasn't really true to how I felt or experienced things. There's always some element of autobiography in there. And so as I've edited, say, Carry Me, Ohio as one body of work over the years, hundreds of different ways and times, the more honest I am about my role in the work, the more interesting the edit becomes. The less photojournalism it is, the less I'm trying to say something specific with the work. That was a lesson to me early on that, just including bits of yourself in the work tends to make it richer and deeper. But then I've had other projects where family doesn't intersect at all, like the second volume in The Invisible Yokes and in Salvation in Baptist My family's never been to Mississippi, though I would love to take them at some point. So that work is a bit separate from the rest, but then family reappears in the Seven Cities, and they make a couple of appearances in the final volume as well.
I feel like I would have a hard time. I always have a hard time combining things from different areas and finding that harmony when mixing it all together. For you, as you've continued doing that over and over and with all of those different, edits and changes, where do you think the connection in all of it is, or is there something specific that you look for that binds it all together? Is it strictly visual, or are you looking more for maybe a specific feeling that you're wanting to pull out of everything? Is it sort of a combination of both? Tell me about that.
I mean, sometimes it's as simple as the tools or the time period being addressed, right? Like The Invisible Yoke as a work is all 35 millimeter color digital made between like 2005 and 2018. There are a lot of photographs that live in this sort of nebulous space that like I'm struggling to pin down where some of the photographs will belong someday. That a lot of images are made and exist as what I would call orphan images for a period of time before they come into some sort of like say hello pictures that are coming together on the edit wall over here. A lot of them were orphan photographs for a while. We the Free was entirely comprised of what I was once thinking of as orphan photographs.
Tell me a little bit about Little Oak Press, your publishing, the way that I've loved finding photographers who they've given themselves this outlet. You know what I mean? And it's a place for pictures to live, and it's not just it all has to be one big book. I like seeing photos being put in different places and explored in different formats and just giving so many of these photos a place to live. How important for you is just having some sort of outlet, like a place to put all these pictures? Does it drive you crazy when you have a lot of scattered, like, I don't know what these are yet? Because that's me personally, that's where I'm at with years and years of stuff that I haven't looked at. And
Mhm.
the idea of like not knowing what to do with it once I open up all of these files, it keeps me up at night because it just feels overwhelming. So tell me about that for you. What's it like to not have an outlet or not have a specific place in mind yet? Or also when you finally do put something in something and it's able to be shared with the world. Just tell me a little bit about that.
It's interesting how need manifests itself for artists, right? Like we need to make, but then we also have to find a place for what we've made to live, at least most of us. Like the making isn't enough. I've been self-publishing for a long time and kind of tinkering with printed matter because I've always preferred the tangible physical object to a digital representation of a photograph. I want to say like 2018. So I published Carry Me Ohio in 2016. I Love You, I'm Leaving in 2017. Days Before, Days After, which was a collaborative book with Jared Suarez, we published in 2018. And I was reaching some sort of point where I was kind of spinning wheels and I wasn't really sure what I was doing photographically. And I think that I'd been hitting some sort of plateau. And I spoke to Jared about my feelings, and he was like, you need to just work the kinks out of your system, make a thing. Don't put a lot of pressure on yourself. Make a zine. Just put it out into the world. And I think that was the first time I made something and called it like a Little Oak Press publication. So Eich is German, it means oak. We're all kind of small in stature. So Little Oak Press. Since I started that, my wife, who is a speech therapist, started her own private speech therapy practice called Little Oak Therapy Services. Um,
Amazing.
so yeah, we're both operating out of the lower half of the house here. So this is the studio where Little Oak Press unfolds. There's also like some storage and bookshelves in the other room, but it's become a place to kind of play and experiment and to figure out what the photographs do together. But for me, like the process is really kind of slow, and I never go out into the world knowing what I'm doing, and I have to wait a long time for the pictures to be made and then kind of percolate. And so I've got multiple edit walls throughout the studio, and part of my process is generally churning out these little 4x6 work prints, and they kind of accumulate, and then eventually what I've been looking at on the wall has got to go. I'm going to clean the deck and start playing with other pictures on the wall, and I'll have friends by and we'll shuffle things, and then I'm going to have an InDesign that's starting to like play off of what's in the wall, and then I'm going back and forth between the digital and the physical, and then I might make a maquette or something physical to see what it feels like when I'm turning the pages. And that doesn't need to be anything precious, right? It's probably going to be like a FedEx Kinko spiral bound joint
Right.
or like a little Mixum zine or something like that. Um, and you just need to make one for yourself. Or sometimes it's taping pictures into a notebook. Everybody's got their own method. But yeah, the work prints on the wall is probably the most critical part of the process for me, just to see things, but not at an overwhelming scale, to be able to like sit with them, let associations start to form, have these conversations with friends in a physical space, but also being able to share like a PDF with people in a digital space. Like if you can't come visit, I can get your feedback and um, incorporate that here. And so there's a lot of that back and forth with kind of a small group of people that I trust and who were kind enough to offer their insights.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far, and we will get right back to it after I tell you about Squarespace, the sponsor of this video. My website was built with Squarespace over a decade ago, and it has managed everything I've needed in my photography career since then. It was incredibly easy to get started, just picking one of the dozens of templates that they have to choose from, dragging and dropping my portfolio into some galleries, and customizing everything to fit my style. Back then, I was using my website mainly as my portfolio for my weddings and portrait photography. Nowadays, I use that same website for self-publishing, so being able to sell my own zines and photo books and prints, anything I would like to sell, I can do all of that directly through my online store, physical or digital products. My email newsletter, being able to keep everybody up to date on what's going on over here, as well as when new books get put into the shop. No matter what your needs are, as a photographer, everything you need can be done with Squarespace, so I highly encourage you to check it out and try it out for yourself for free at squarespace.com. But when you're ready to launch your site, go to squarespace.com/mattday. Use the code MattDay at checkout, and that'll save you 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. So thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video and supporting this channel. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Carry Me, Ohio began in 2006, spans until 2015 photographically. And initially I had kind of envisioned, like the way everything goes for me. I'm like the photographs are smarter than I am, so I have to kind of live with them and see what they're saying and where they're leading. But you start making one project and then it leads you to another project, and then you start to find these echoes, and they ask or make you ask questions, right? Like, what does this say about myself? Or what does this say about America? Or my interests or what I'm drawn to? And so that's kind of how these threads start to form over time. But I'd envisioned The Invisible Yoke as a trilogy, three books, all kind of microcosms of the American experience, all that represented some legacy of the past that's still impacting present day Americans. So Carry Me, Ohio, it was the legacy of coal and industry, and the way that like the withdrawal of that industry had left space for the opioid epidemic to flood in around the time that I was making those photographs. And then in Mississippi, it was about the legacy of racism and segregation that continue to impact the socioeconomics of this town and the physical geography of it as well. And then in the Seven Cities, I was thinking about the legacy of the military industrial complex and its role in shaping where I grew up in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. We're home to the largest naval base in the world. And so I put together these little maquettes of those three books and then felt like it wasn't doing everything I needed it to do. It was missing some piece that felt representative of the breadth of the country. And that's when I started putting together this fourth volume. This was probably around 2012, 2013 that I was just beginning to think about, like, okay, this is the fourth chapter of this series. And then I entered grad school. I put it together as a maquette with like all four bodies of work under one roof. And I made 12 of those and got some feedback from a grad professor that made me rethink everything. He was like, it feels like one of those metal albums where everything is like less than 2 minutes long and just like blasting the cymbals the whole way through. I was like, cool, that is not exactly the vibe that I'm going for, you know, because I've always loved music and thought about parallels to music and photography, poetry and photography. And so yeah, he got me thinking about how I could better present the work with a little more nuance. And so it was around that time that Radio Cadiff, who's the publisher for Sturm and Drang, found a blurb copy of Carry Me, Ohio in a used bookstore called Arcana Books, like an art bookstore
Yeah, yeah.
in Culver City. And he reached out and said, "Hey, I'd be interested in reprinting this because I'd done a limited edition run of 100 copies at that point, and they'd sold out. I used my wife's student loan money from when she was in grad school to pay for them, and so I had to like sell them quickly to pay that back.
Right.
This was when I was in grad school, and so I was like, I don't know, I was hemming and hawing about it, not knowing if I should trust somebody I'd never met before with this thing, and so I kind of put this impossible ask to him. I was like, well, I really want to do four books.
Would you
Thinking
mind?
nobody, yeah, nobody's gonna be crazy enough to say yes. And he was like, okay. And so the first one, that was in 2015 that we started the
Oh my
conversation.
God.
First book came out in 2016 and 2018, 2020, and then the last one was 2024. And all of this kind of like around the time that, Trump takes office and I started teaching part-time and then full-time in the pandemic. So there were some unexpected bumps along the way. We finally have the finished slipcase
Oh my.
handmade by Elliott Dudick Studios in Richmond, Virginia. It's a beautiful thing that I got to collaborate with a good friend on, that he's spent a lot of hours carefully hand making these slipcases.
That's
Um,
incredible. So all
but
from yeah, self-publishing a blurb book and finding that someone that's incredible.
Yeah, it was a very slow process, but the last one was the most painful to put together. And part of the reason that it took so long was just me really struggling with confronting the work and all of its inadequacies, and looking back 15 years and being like, oh, cool, I thought that was a great decision then. But
Okay. So talk to me about that because 15 years is a long time. And as you just said, like your tendencies as a photographer and your tastes and what you're drawn to, all of that changes over time. So the fact that you're pulling so much cohesion out of that many years is a testament because I feel like I have bounced all over the place at times. Was that hard for you to like I mean, did you really have to cull through to find that sort of like fluency in the work over that much time, or did because it doesn't feel the photos. If there's a way to like date the photos, then you might be able to tell the time difference. But I don't look through the photos and feel like I'm seeing the photographer's path that
mm,
we all what I mean, where you can tell
yeah,
like, oh, okay, you were really into this during this time frame. Uh, Everything feels cohesive despite that much time passing. I'm sure, at least in that time, I would assume the equipment you were using probably changed. Going
mhm,
from, that's a 2005 to, or is that what it was? 2005, you said, to
mhm,
2020 or so?
yeah,
Uh, yeah,
yeah.
it's
Went through a few cameras in that time
exactly.
period.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that technology went through a lot in that time frame. So I'm curious about that, like finding the fluency there and getting things cohesive. What was that like?
Well, as mentioned, you have to confront all of the poor decisions that your younger self made. And so there's a lot of in the early years, just JPEGs, and shooting wide open at, I'm like, oh, this lens has got a 1.8 aperture. I better use that. Even though it's bright and sunny out, like I have no
Right.
need for this, but that shallow depth of field just looks so great. So it just had to let go of 98% of all of that. The longer I was kind of working, the more I knew what I was doing, the more intentional I could be, and the higher the hit rate became, photographically. Also, the more kind of comfortable I became with the tools. Um, but I do feel like this is a condensed period of time that's done because like I don't use 35 millimeter anymore. I've been medium format pretty much exclusively since 2018. Been moving more towards black and white the last few years in particular. Still love color and bring it into play every now and again, but definitely lean more heavily towards black and white. There was something that I'd read a number of years ago, was a writer writing about writing, and he wrote that the writer is always working themselves out in public, and by the time something is published, you've become somebody else. And of course, my memory being what it is, can't attribute any of that, but I can tell you that I felt seen when I read that, because that's very true for photographers as well, where by the time something is inked on paper, we've probably moved on to different ideas or ways of seeing or communicating. Um, and I feel like the invisible yoke definitely reflects the way that I was trained to see as a kind of young photojournalist, aspiring documentary photographer coming out of the Midwest America. in the early 2000s, it's louder than I feel like I actually am. And one of the funny ways that the creative world moves in little circles is when I was an undergrad, actually at the start of the Carry Me Ohio work, I was in a class with Stan A. Lost, who's been a professor at OU for 20 something years. He's about to retire. And he was like, Matt, the world is in color. Everything that gets published is in color. If you won't start working in color, I'm going to fail you out of my class. And so I started working in color and started making the Carry Me Ohio pictures in color. And that's how I worked for like 15 years until I went to grad school and felt the need to find a different way to communicate, and then found myself working in black and white again and thinking about Stan.
That's
Um,
amazing. Well, I mean, I wanted to ask about longevity in general as a photographer, because for you to photograph all these different things, I mean, just to be in the position to take the photos in not just this book, but all the other three books in this set, you have been out there making a lot of photos in that time frame. And how do you find that longevity in, I mean, for some people, keeping the interest or passion there is second nature because it's just how you operate and it's just what you do, and you do it long enough, it just becomes kind of part of your regular practice. But keeping that career going, keeping the wheel spinning, so to speak, on or the gears turning, maybe wheel spinning sounds a little less focused, but the gears turning on these projects. I mean, I'm inspired by your work itself, but also knowing that you're also teaching, you're also a husband, a father. Where do you, I guess, find that sort of drive or passion for it that keeps you going when the rest of life is often so much more demanding and present and right in front of us at all times, whereas a lot of times, at least for most of us, the photography is when we can squeeze it in here and there. We find little moments to at least nowadays venture off solo. I find myself making a lot less pictures on a daily basis than I used to, just as my kids grow and as life changes. For you as a father and as a husband and as a teacher, you've got a nice break coming up for you, and I'm excited for you. But how do you keep that sort of engagement for yourself going?
a great question that I am constantly wrestling with, and very seldom content with the answer. But as I've gotten older, and as my kids have gotten older, it's been harder to photograph them. But how old are your kids now?
So my oldest just turned 10, and she's
Okay.
she's somewhat nonverbal. She's on the autism spectrum. She has an intellectual disability. My middle child, my son, is 8, and our youngest just turned 3. So
Okay.
we've got a little bit of a mix right here. But we're definitely in that stage where it's like our two big kids aren't little kids anymore. They
Hmm.
feel like big kids. You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
just it's and this year my wife started her she was a nurse on the floor at the hospital for about 7 years, but this year she started as the school nurse for my daughter's school, where it's just all
Amazing.
kids with disabilities. And I've been able to go there and like make pictures there over the last few years of all the students and like become a part of that little community there. And we're just finding ourselves in like different day-to-day routines and just different life schedules. And I have been finding out how to like still be a photographer while
Hmm.
also just changing and growing as a parent and as a husband. And when I see other photographers who it's oftentimes I think seen as this like all or nothing thing where it's like, do you want to have the art career or do you want to have a family? You know what I mean? And so I get excited when I find other people who it's not that it's, a cakewalk, I guess, to combine it all. But like
Yeah.
from an early age, I knew I want to have a family. I'm excited to be a dad. You know what I mean? I had a really good relationship with my parents and my brother, and um, I always thought about that when I was younger. But I knew if I'm going to do that, that also means I'm going to have to say no to a lot of things that I would otherwise be jumping at the chance to do. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Had I not had those responsibilities and things. So I always get excited when I see photographers, whether it be mothers, dads, whichever, just being able to chase the things that they are excited about and the things that keep them engaged with photography. But photographers being very isolated, it's often just us going out with our camera and finding things. And there's something about that where you just continue searching for it. It's like a self-fulfilling thing, like you have to
Mhm.
get out there and make the pictures, otherwise it's just not going to happen. You've got to be proactive in it, I guess.
Yeah, and I start to feel the itch grow the longer I go without being out to make photographs, though I've noticed like both the pandemic caused kind of a seismic shift in the way that I like think and work, but also being a full-time professor has changed a lot, 'cause I don't have to monetize the work in the same way I used to when I was solely freelance. Yeah, it has grown more difficult, I guess, as I've gotten older to carve out the time, the energy. Um, the work we're talking about right now was made largely when I was in my 20s and early 30s, and so maybe I had a little more energy and stamina, and I wasn't working full time. So, a lot of these were kind of like assignment outtakes or personal projects that never became, a full thing. So I've been teaching full time since 2019, so started less than a year before the pandemic,
Oh my
and
gosh.
um, I've just noticed that my kind of creative output has continued to kind of like drop off in the years after that, and sometimes I want to dismay over that, and sometimes I'm okay with it because I realize like, I'm changing, I'm evolving, my needs as an artist have changed and evolved as my family's needs have evolved. So my girls are 17 and 12, going to be 18 and
Wow.
13 this fall, which is kind of bonkers for me to process. I don't know. We're just at an interesting place in life,
Yeah.
and teaching is a blessing in a lot of ways, in that it kind of it can replenish the tank on a good day. There are a lot of days that it empties the tank out, but like on a good day, it can replenish the tank, and you get to talk about photography and the many things that go into that as a human being. And I enjoy interacting with aspiring young artists who are trying to figure out how to navigate this strange world.
Right.
I
And
find that can be rewarding.
the university itself, also just, people that you would have met through Ohio University, but having that sort of like creative community, like having people that you can call to talk about work, to share work. How has that been for you over time? I mean, for me, I know with social media and everything, it's become a lot easier to have that sense of community because when I was growing up and getting started, like I didn't know any other photographers. There wasn't a photography community or program of any kind around here. High school, like there was just nothing. And so it was all very like just I like the way this looks, and that's all I know about it. I don't know how to read
Mhm.
into it more than that. I don't know where to get feedback. For you, how important is that, especially now, just having some sort of creative community, not just for, the sake of like getting feedback, but as we mentioned earlier, kind of refilling the tank at least. Like I always find maybe once a month I'll actually be able to like talk about photography with someone in the real world, and then every time I come away from it being like, oh, that's okay. Now I'm back in there. What's that like for you? Just finding your community nowadays, I guess.
I mean, it's critical, and it's constantly kind of changing, expanding, contracting, right? Yeah, both of us are rocking our Baltimore Photo
I
Space
didn't notice.
t-shirts, which has something to do with our community, right?
Yeah.
And it's lovely that spaces like that exist that can connect us despite our kind of disparate locations. but it started at OU for me. Like, and I did have some, through the Virginian pilot, some exposure to the byproducts of a good photo community, right? Like they had a great kind of team and sense of camaraderie in the department there, and that led to great coverage over the years and people sustaining, long careers at that newspaper. But when I went to OU, I felt like I found my tribe and this group of people that were all trying to figure this out together. And I loved the fact that we weren't really siloed as grads and undergrads. And so I became friends with a lot of the grad students who brought more life experience. And, you know, as we kind of touched on earlier, like I was falling in love in college, but I also started my family in college. Like we became parents when we were 20 years old. And, that made things different for us as we were trying to navigate this kind of creative path and made community feel even more necessary if we were going to survive, both like family community, but also the broader kind of communities that we situated ourselves in. And so when we finished at OU, we moved to Norfolk, Virginia, because that's where my wife got into graduate school at Old Dominion University. It's also kind of near where my family was living. And we knew that if I was going to freelance and travel a bit, that we were going to need some family support while she was in grad school and starting to work. And so it was also at a strange time when the pilot had, I think, two staff photographer openings, and I applied, with high hopes. Like I'm this young college graduate coming back home, hoping to like slide into that full-time staff job and just like ride that into the sunset or whatever. But I kind of knew that newspapers were not for me and that that wasn't what was going to work. And I also knew I didn't want to give up my copyright. And so, I had all of these hesitations, but still on paper, it seemed like the logical thing. And I did not get the job, but they hired Ross Taylor and Amanda Lucier, who were, oh, and Preston Ganaway, all within the same year, actually. Um, and they're all amazing humans, photographers, storytellers, and people that I'm really fortunate to call friends now. But Amanda and I ended up being neighbors. She lived in a house that shared a fence with us. And so we started doing this thing called Hop the Fence Photo Night in Norfolk. So it was sort of like the pilot staffers were the core group, but then, we would have like the local enthusiast, who did like poorly lit studio nudes or like the guy that, was only into aerial photography, like just like these really niche kind of like
Yep.
local characters would show up. And it was hosted in Amanda's garage. She had like a projector, a fridge full of beer. It would like the rule was just kind of refill the fridge, right?
Yeah.
Take what you want, but refill the fridge when you're done. And then people would jump the fence between Amanda's place and my place and end up on the porch, chain smoking cigarettes, drinking, looking at photo books until the wee hours of the morning. And so that was our kind of community after I graduated from undergrad. And to be honest, that's still about the most magical it has ever been.
I mean, it sounds like that sounds like just all you would need. I recently just had a few friends over for a few hours, and we were just sitting out here in my barn looking at photo books, and I was like, this is such a rare thing that I get to do with people like in the real physical space like this right now. Um, but that will get me by for the next 60 days. You know what I
hmm
mean? Like
hmm
it's like that's all I needed. That filled me back up.
Yeah, I had a photo boy adventure last summer where some of my buddies from DC hopped on the train together and they came down and picked him up from the train
Oh,
and took him down to
awesome.
the river and bummed around the studio and played with work prints and looked at books and ate tacos and it was a good day.
It's funny how like simple it is. Like I'm gonna go play with my friends now, and we're gonna go and take pictures, and we're gonna look at books together and talk about it, and then okay, see you guys. Like it feels like you're out playing with your friends as kids, but that it gives you the same kind of enrichment. I think you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Well, man, I'm super excited to not only have you here on the channel to talk about this book. I'm excited for you and this book. To finish off the four books like that, the box set. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for you to get a break as well. Speaking of that, one final question, I guess, do you have plans already for what's next? I would assume, I'm sure there are already things in the works, but are you looking to like immediately jump on to the next thing, or are you gonna enjoy some time off first?
Yeah, now that I'm done with teaching for the semester, I'm spending a lot of time in the yard. Planted a rhododendron bush in the backyard earlier today. That
Amazing.
was felt like a good Saturday activity.
Hell yeah.
Um, I've got two or three different books on the wall right now, like kind of in various stages. None of them have homes, and don't have any set published times or anything like that. I had kind of created this arbitrary timeline of when I wanted to release different things, but after this last book, I kind of just threw that out the window. I'm just gonna go with the flow, see what happens. I do want to re-release I Love You, I'm Leaving in 2027. That's kind of like the next thing that I would really like to do. And then the work that I'm spending a lot of time with right now, it's called Birdsong Over Black Water, and it's supposed to be wrapping up this year, maybe next year, and then maybe like 2028 or something like that. It would be
Okay.
ready to see the light of day. And I'm planning to get out and do some road trips during sabbatical, make some more work around America. There's a few places that I haven't photographed in. I had set this goal to have photographed in all 50 states by the time I turned 30, and I'm going to be turning 40 over sabbatical. Still haven't accomplished that goal, but before I turn 40, I'm hoping to finish the list, and
Hell
so I've got
yeah.
a few trips to hit. So I'll be out making those pictures, trying to see what it feels like in America these days, and looking at a lot of books, seeing where things lead. But that's kind of what I've got on the horizon.
Hell yeah. Well, I know I Love You, I'm Leaving. I've shared that one on stream on my Wednesday night live streams. We always look at photo books and zines together on stream. And I know I've shared that one and people have, uh, they've brought it up on stream, like in the chat, but then I also know people have messaged me and they're like, do you know if there's ever going to be more of that one? So that's good to know that you're going to do more of that. Um,
That's the hope, gotta
right, right.
send out those proposals this summer and see what
Sure.
comes back. But yeah,
Absolutely. And then Birdsong Over Blackwater. I was going to ask when you mentioned kind of returning to black and white and exploring more of that. I was going to ask if that was something that you were still working on as well. So very exciting, man. I'm excited to hear that. And yeah, if you're as you're making your travels, if you're passing through Ohio at any time, would love to grab a cup of coffee with you and flip through some books. You can take a little detour here.
that sounds great. Yeah, we've got a few places to stop on our way up to visit some family in Ohio this summer. So we'll
Awesome.
definitely hit you up. I think that'll be in July at some point. Hopefully we
Perfect.
can catch all around.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be great, man. Well, if anyone's interested in picking up a copy of the book, I'll have links and everything in the description. But if there's anywhere that you would like to send people, let them know.
Sturm and Drang website is the best place to get copies, other than our friends at Baltimore Photo Space or Photo Eye out in Santa Fe. But yeah, Baltimore Photo Space is the closest one to us, and copies sold through Sturm and Drang, ship signed from my studio here in Virginia.
I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Matt Eich. Huge thanks to Matt for giving his time and sharing everything he did in this video with all of us. Really, really appreciated, and I'm excited to hear what you all think in the comments down below. That is it for today, though. Thank you all for watching this video. I love you very much, and I'll see you next time.